Because, you know, I represent Onehunga, and I went from trying to find out why the line was stopped at Newmarket and not Britomart to now hearing that the lines are just going to shut down anyway, both that line and the eastern line, which is all of my area and other councillors' areas. And we have no say in that. And then the community's expectation is, well, you're sitting at that table, why don't you know? So yeah, that's really the thrust of my questioning there.
And that is a good question. Christiane, I think you should take that.
The closure of the lines, as David Gordon explained, is a necessity that had been, and the works had been identified as a necessity for a couple of years. Kirail have done the planning on how they will deliver the works, and the consequence is that we won't be able to run trains on portions of the network for a period of time in the time leading to CRL. So that plan was presented to us in the recent month. We are now working to address those closures by, I would say, designing replacement services for the period of time where some stations will be closed. And I think there is not much we can do right now than acknowledging the need for Kirail to undertake those urgent and needed works in the coming years.
Yeah, and I guess, is there anything else they can foresee? You know, like it's not in any of our previous reports from Auckland Transport where this was flagged, we're going to shut down rail. Do you know what I mean? Like, so is there anything else that they can foresee so that we're not on the back foot with our communities again?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Bartley. I think that question of communication and having upfront knowledge is really important, and I think that will probably manifest itself in the AT update too, as it goes to not just the train network but the buses and ferries. So I think we definitely need to pick that up in the next item. That's a really good point. IMSB Chair David Taipuri.
Ka nui te mihi ki a koutou tēnei wā, ki a koe John, ki te chairman o te tepu nei, tēnā koe. Just a few questions on, you can probably direct who they go to, but probably this first one on the first two, maybe Auckland Transport, but just to be consistent, I think, with Council's policies. Is there a strategy or employment strategy to identify Māori for those employment opportunities you talked about?
Is this in relation to drivers and training of drivers and staff at the stations? That would be a question for Auckland Transport. While they're answering, Sean may also want to address some of the employment schemes that City Rail Link Limited actually have in place as well.
Right.
Can you pick that one up, Sean?
Yeah, we have a scheme that we've been running now for nearly 3 years, which is focused on young people, particularly Maori and Pacifica, who have what we have. It's hard to say. They have sort of impediments to joining the workforce. So this is for school leavers, and we've been running a progressive employment program now for nearly 3 years.
Mr. Chairman,
Your mic's off, Sean. You have to repeat that last 15 seconds that we didn't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is it back on now?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, so, sorry, I'm talking on an iPhone. We run a scheme for youth, particularly Maori and Pacifica. We've been running it for 3 years, focused on young rangatahi who have, you could say, structural challenges getting into the workforce. It's a particular focus of ours. We have tranches of 6 youth, so they get full pastoral support. We're into our 5th or 6th month. We also have programs which focus on getting procurement to Maori and Pacifica companies as well. That's another focus we have at City Rail Link. I think there are also similar programs being run by the Link Alliance.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I guess just to qualify that question, I wasn't just talking about drivers, talking across the board. The second question was kind of answered there because about procurement, what strategy for procurement of Māori businesses there. So I'll go to my third question, which is probably Sean again. How does, I sort of pushed to have board members that are Māori on the CRR board, but that hasn't been supported. And the offset of that or the mitigation for that has been put down that there's a mana whenua forum. So I'm pretty keen to know what's the strategic oversight and direction of that forum and the influence on the program and project outcomes to date.
I might be
The forum.
you go,
Sorry?
Sean. You go, Sean,
going to
and
answer
then
that?
I can respond as well. Yeah.
Well, the forum oversights the design of the and has had considerable input into the design of the project. That's been the major area of focus, but the forum's also helped us around areas of, I think, worker safety, and they were a big resource during COVID.
In terms of the board appointments themselves, it's City Rail Link Limited as a Crown entity, and so it's through that process that directors are appointed to the board.
No, I'm aware of how the appointments are. I'm just raising my disappointment that there are none. And so, as I say, the mitigation's always been, we've got a forum that we can go to, although I don't think that's a substitute for having board members. But I'm just keen to know, make sure that there's progress happening with that forum and it's actually being utilised in terms of what's going on. So thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Member Taipari. Councillor Leone.
Kia ora. I just want to tautoko what was just said there about having mana whenua Māori representation on the board. I agree with that should be taking place because it's on most of the other boards that we have. But my actual question too, just following on from the employment strategy and the fact that I hold the Māori Outcomes portfolio as well, is how many young people or Māori have you been able to employ from the program that you're running, and are you looking at direct looking at forming relationships with mana whenua that already have strategies set up to look at better outcomes in that area?
The question was, sorry, how many Māori have been employed in that program?
That's correct, Sean.
Look, I couldn't give the breakdown. It would be significant. It's probably the majority, but between Māori and Pacifica. But I can come back to you with information. I just don't want to make it up on the spot.
Thank you. My second question was just around the number of overseas workers that we're having to bring in, and obviously the costs that would be associated to that. So can I just get an idea of how many we are having to bring in for this project, and will we have to basically maintain that for the next 30 years along with the maintenance?
Is this directed at me?
I think it's a
Yes,
question.
it is.
Sure.
On foreign workers, Sean.
Well, pre-COVID, I think it wasn't well known. The New Zealand construction industry, particularly the heavy part of it, is carried by foreign workers, short-term migrants. I don't think that's commonly known. So when the borders were shut, the New Zealand construction industry was basically much like I think horticulture, hospitality, and health. Once the borders were shut, we had a massive shortage of workers because we were not able to get these people into the country. But the numbers would be significant. They would be in the hundreds. We have been working in the last 2 years to get some of these people back into the country, because otherwise the project would have been going far slower than it has gone. So it's been enormously important from the point of view of progressing the project that we get these workers back in, because we simply couldn't access them in New Zealand. And all the time that we were getting workers, and I'll use steel workers as an example, they were being poached onto other projects because the construction industry was so short. So the construction of the project is driven to a significant amount, and it always was going to be, because New Zealand doesn't build underground metros. The overseas worker component was always going to be significant. I can't speak for the operations side of it, though.
Thank you, Councillor Leone. And I think certainly one of the things the Mayor and I picked up on our visit was that a lot of the initial workforce that came back were Maori from Australia, had been working in a number of the big projects over there, which was, and we talked to a number of them, they were very experienced and holding quite important positions in that work. So we just, Councillor Hills and then Councillor Walker.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. First for Sean, and I know this is not the budget, but I just want to double check that in the process around the budget, there is still no reductions in the project, such as accessibility, services, lifts, toilets, things like that. We're still aiming to have the project on track of what was planned.
The full scope of the project is being delivered.
Cool.
The time, there was a review done of scope in 2019.
Yep.
And that was really the last economic point you could do any variations to scope in any sort of efficient way. As of now, the job is fully designed, it's fully consented, it's probably 99% contracted and procured, and if it's not on site now, it's being ordered and it's being delivered. So the full scope of the project, as I think was outlined 4 years ago, is being delivered. There's been no reductions, and as of now, there'd be no ability to reduce costs on the job, which would not be inefficient and wasteful.
Thank you for that certainty. Question for Christian and Derek. I guess on the drivers, I lack a little bit of confidence on if we will or can get enough for CRL opening due to sort of requesting or being concerned about ferry crew and bus drivers over a year ago, and we're in a much worse state. Some of those, or many of that, out of your control. How do you see the ability to ramp up that work and ensure you have the number of drivers and staff you need by that date?
Kia ora everyone, I'm Derek Kopa, the Group Manager of Metro Services. So Councillor Hills, the current staffing situation at our rail franchise operator is very good. They do not have staffing shortages. They needed to run a recruitment campaign, 2 campaigns to fill the shortfall initially. They were very successful. The conditions they offer and the type of work appears to attract a lot more candidates from the local pool. During the rail network rebuild, some of the train services will be reduced, therefore they will be managing their staffing levels during the time, allowing for additional annual leave allocation and things like that. And prior to the training that was mentioned earlier, they will be starting their recruitment campaign. So based on the current track record and based on the current situation in staffing levels across the train services, we are confident they will be able to get the crew required to operate CRL services.
And Kiwi Rail helping, you're not looking at reducing people's hours and pay during the rail closures, are you? Are Kiwi Rail helping back fund that?
At this stage, Auckland One Rail, the employer of those train drivers and train crew, is not planning on reducing any conditions. It's rather allowing people to have overdue annual leave during the periodic closures as we move from one section of the rail network to another.
Okay, so you'll still be growing during that point.
Yes.
And last question, was there
Just to note that even if some sections of the network are closed, the trains that were supposed to run on those sections will run on other sections. So we will not reduce the number of services by
a considerable amount?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, Chair, thank you. A question for David. And obviously we thank you and appreciate, $330 million worth of long overdue works. But I guess my concern is what your perception or ability of working with AT around ensuring those users come back. So are you expecting pop-up bus lanes? Are you working with AT to help fund that, or the Minister? Obviously, you're doing the works, but you want the long-term passengers to come back, and if we don't help provide good options, did you have a plan with AT on that? Are you looking at that?
Clearly, we're working with AT on the response, and some of the money that is in the project for physical works is in fact going to funding that response. The logistics and the detail of it, we do, however, leave to AT. We're not strong in that area, but it is a partnership. This is not something that we've simply sprung on them in any way, shape or form.
Okay, and your expectation that after this, the amount of rail closures will be far less in the sort of late 2020s? You're trying to guarantee that for customers, residents?
Well, I think unless we guarantee that, then this exercise is a bit futile. It has to be lower, and it will be lower because the type of maintenance we do will be different.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Councillor Walker.
Just got a few quick questions, and really my interest is just to know that these things are under consideration. The first one just goes to the need for resilience and dealing with the peak in terms of supply. So are you looking at battery sets to deal with that? So you've got companies like Tesla that have got battery sets that you can just plug in, and they deal with resilience and especially peak problems in networks. So is that sort of thing being considered to add resilience to the network, which would also go to issues around signalisation, because you don't want that to go?
That's a question for...
Yeah, so really, is it under consideration? Could be yes and no.
You got that one, David? Battery sets and resilience?
Well, it's both battery sets and also harmonic filters are the two things that you can look at. Both power companies, being Vector and Counties Energy, are looking at what do they have to put in place in their network to deal with the peak. So yes.
Okay, and the other question just goes to the training. Are you looking at using simulators, as they use in planes and trucks and lots of things for...
Yes, as part of the projects that AT are leading and delivering to support CRL, there is an upgrade of our current simulator. So we upgrade both the I would say the tool, but also the software behind.
Okay.
And it's on track. Yes.
And the last question...
And we will also use that simulator for the training on P2P, on Papakola to Pukekohe, which is a new section for Auckland One Rail's drivers.
And the last question is just around the track remediation that you've got to do. Overseas, there's a lot of automation and that kind of project work. So I'm assuming that that's in play so that you can really, maximise the effectiveness of how you deal with the under-track work and laying and so on. Thanks.
yes, I can confirm that automation is there for most of it, but for the dig out work, I'm afraid it is the old-fashioned digger with a shovel on the end. Post that work, then we can have a much more automated network.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you, Councillor Walker. I think Councillor Ferry, did you want very quickly reframe your question that wasn't answered first time round?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. The question that was outstanding now is just the one about Tūnuku and level crossings, which I think one of the gentlemen, David, I think, was about to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Look, it's an interesting exercise here. If you look at the level crossing problem simply through a transport lens, it will take you to a set of solutions. You either close the road, or you bury the railway, or you put a flyover or something like that. But the way some of the cities have looked at it, and I particularly draw from Melbourne, is that they've looked at this as an opportunity to get into placemaking, to look at the value, whether you can actually create communities and lift the value of the land. And look, I can't comment on Tūnuku or anyone else's particular competencies in this area. I'd simply be urging councillors to look at the level crossing issue as an opportunity for civic development as well as solve a transport problem.
Thank you. I guess I just point out that, you mentioned urban regeneration. That's what we task Tūnuku with.
Yes, I understand.
So
yeah.
be good to make that connection. Thank you.
Okay, one final question from Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you. And my question is partly to you, Mr. Chair. That is, obviously there is a real appetite for detail, and given the delegations of this committee, which is the oversight of the CRL, and also the responsibility for framing up a One Transport plan, I wonder whether you could give us an indication of how often these briefings may be available, and what opportunity, if members have queries around the CRL in the interim, because we're getting into a level of detail in some situations where people obviously really want. But I certainly welcome the opportunity, and I'm sure the IMSB do too, that we're having that opportunity to really look in depth at this project. So with Barry Potter as our lead officer, would you be looking at a quarterly update, or what would you be thinking of, Mr. Chair, just to give members the comfort of knowing that if they have a number of queries that these can be dealt with, and also some of the policy around this will be within this committee for directives to Auckland Transport?
Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Fletcher. I think in respect of the delegations that this committee has received as they go to direction, oversight and specific projects. The City Rail Link is one, but there's also a reference to the regional transport projects as a whole. One of the things we'll be looking for, and I'm sure, and I know the Mayor is very supportive of this, is in the first instance a more in-depth update of what's happening in these various projects, many of which go to billions of dollars and are very significant to the transport network as a whole, and an increased frequency in respect of that reporting mechanism back. I don't think I've got an exact sequence other than to say that we see that as being desirable, and certainly Barry Potter has indicated a willingness to include in that, for those people that are interested, site visits, which once was a feature of the Auckland governing body in terms of what's happening around the wider region. And I think as far as our overall transport plan goes that the Mayor has signalled, I think that'll be very useful for all of us to fulfil that sort of oversight function that is quite to the fore in this committee. Okay, thank you. Now, I will move that we receive the update on the City Rail Link project.
Sorry, Councillor Henderson has...
Who?
Councillor Henderson has comments.
Yes, we'll just move it and then we'll go to you, Councillor Henderson. So I've moved it, Councillor Fletcher has seconded it. We'll put it open to the floor now if anyone has got any comment they'd like to make. I think, Councillor Henderson, you indicated.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for indulging me, colleagues. I just want to direct Council's attention to a really great article on Greater Auckland about the dire need to change the decision around upgrading the Henderson station for the CRL, which is scheduled to have the turnback area for trains, and diverting it to Swanson instead. If we did Henderson, this will mean Sturgis Road, Ranui, Swanson stations will never get any better services at peak than they currently do, thereby leaving on the table a lot of CRL's investment for West Auckland residents. The catchment area we're talking about is about 35,000 people, but it's going to go up to about 50,000 in 2050. And already Swanson has taken on huge amounts of growth. As my colleague Councillor Ken Turner knows, you know, we're spending $4 billion on this project. We can't be leaving significant benefits on the table like this because we maybe want a penny pinch on this. And yet we're pouring money into places of Auckland, frankly, that may get growth, but haven't gotten the growth yet. We've taken on huge amounts of growth, very hard for us to get any kind of investment that we need. I've actually written last term about this, trying to seek a change on the situation, and was rebuffed. So I'll be asking again in the future, what argument needs to be made here to move Henderson to Swanson? I just want to briefly raise two more things. Thank you, colleagues. I believe the capital costs will actually be a lot cheaper. You know, I don't know anyone here that's been to Swanson. The station actually is on a huge land footprint. We can very easily expand it and turn the trains around there with minimal cost, whereas Henderson train station is right in the middle of a town centre, and that's going to be extremely expensive to do that, and disruptive for the community potentially. So it's cheaper and it's better. I think that we should be doing it. And just before I yield the floor, the other thing I want to briefly mention is rail crossings. So if we don't fix that issue, I think that's a really, really important one for us to do, then we actually don't get a lot more frequency anyway. So again, we're spending $4 billion on a CRL plus without getting the actual benefits at the other end. It's also safer for pedestrians to sort out this level crossing issue. We've lost lives in West Auckland recently around this, but it also has the happy accident of helping traffic congestion, which is always a good thing that people appreciate. So, you know, these are the kind of things that I want the CRL management and people to be working on, and I welcome the opportunity to talk to them further about this offline. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Very apt contribution there. Do we have anyone that wants to speak to the item? No, there isn't. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was a lengthy item, but I think there was a lot of really good questions and certainly a lot of detail that's been conveyed to us. The next item